Hey guys, so today we have a critique of a low 9 average. I know some of you who are faster have been asking for a video like this, but because I know a lot of the people watching this are not quite at 9 seconds yet, I'll also be focusing on what you can learn from these solves. Remember, Patreon $10 tier if you want to get critiqued. Anyway, let's get into it. So we're doing white cross only. Here we have green and red. We also notice blue is quite easy to set up. And when you put in green and red, correct relative to each other like that, orange is also set up. So how this cross solution was done was with a pretty good idea that I think a lot of newer cubers should try to use, is when you have something like this and you want to deal with other pieces that are at the front afterwards, then you hold this stuff at the back. So you do that first, and then you have a better transition into F2L by getting your B moves out of the way. So how this was done was by holding white at the front and then putting green and red in like this, which sets up orange over here. And then from here, I didn't quite like what was done, but orange was put in here not to solve it because that's wrong, but just so that we can get blue to the top and then insert blue here. And then afterwards we have a cube rotation and then insert orange. After inserting blue here, to insert orange, we can do D and then F prime like that, or we can instead do wide U and L prime. Now, even though that idea at the beginning of the cross, holding stuff at the back first, is generally a good idea, in this case is not quite as good because if we just insert green and red like that, which is the same thing you did just facing a different side, then we get this afterwards, which is a much better thing to deal with rather than putting in orange like that. Just align the rest of the cross and do these two together like this. Okay, so after the cross, you had this pair, and here we're really going to focus on look ahead, and something I talked about a lot in my last critique video. Here, as you do this, then you saw this corner, and this is part of the pair you ended up doing next. So as you do this, I just want you guys watching to take a look at all the pieces here already and look at orange and green, look for that edge. Could it be any of the pieces that we are already looking at? So the options are anything in the top layer, obviously not green or orange. And here we have not green, orange, not this one, not this one. So clearly it's at a spot we cannot see right now. And if you've already looked at everything on one side, then the only possible location is the back slot over here. So that's why it's really nice looking for a corner, because once you find that, then its edge can either be on one side's full field of view or the other side's back edge. So we already know it's this one and we already know how it's oriented. So as we do this, all we have to see is the orientation and location of the corner. And there we go. And then now we should be able to go straight into this because we've deduced that the edge is there. So here what you did was you rotated and then did this pair. And even if you were to rotate, there is a better way to do this. And you did R, U2, R prime, which is fine, but just not the finger tricks with the regrip. Always, anytime it's front slots, you start with thumb on front. So R, U2, R prime like this. And then insert this. And then next you were already looking ahead to these. You didn't see this pair being better, so no problem for that. That is just being good at look ahead. And then these two. All right, and then soon. The rest is pretty straightforward, but there is something that you should look out for here. When you have the U-AUF for T-perms, a lot of people end up figuring this out themselves, but when you're first starting out, often after the T-perm here, when you have your hands in a position like this and you cannot do U, people end up regripping. But if you watch what Jonathan does here, he does this finger trick with the rest of his hand. And that's really good to learn because it is how most advanced solvers will end their T-perm like this. For the second solve, we have our cross pieces mostly on top and not very good, and this blue one down here. So what you did was you held blue front and did L2 to insert red, R prime, F, and then R to insert the green one, and then align the cross to insert blue, and then here rotate and insert orange like this. After the L2, you did R prime F, and then an unnecessary R as it affects no cross pieces here. But if you think about it, it's not always all about move count because R prime F regrip is actually slower than R prime F R because R doesn't require you to move your hand off the cube. But for you guys watching as an exercise, maybe try to come up with a better cross solution for this that doesn't have a rotation and maybe save some moves because this is quite a hard cross. So here's my thinking for the cross that may be a hint for you. If you have only one cross piece that's currently in the bottom, then you can start with any D move before you start solving the pieces on top. And by doing a D move, that could actually give you a big advantage. For example, green and blue right now are set up in spots where they're really hard to get both in opposite, but if you just do a D move first, then now they're really nice. So then for green and blue, you can insert them this way and get it correctly, but orange is now going to go in the wrong spot. Or you can just go the other way first like this. That's what I would do. And then insert red. Just to save this corner. Insert these two together and orange goes in. And as you insert orange, instead of doing that, you can add U prime, and that puts this in here as well. And I still have that solved corner, so that does make an X cross. In fact, in fewer moves than the original cross. So here, after your cross solution, you had this pair, and you actually found it by looking at the back. Now at your level, I recommend being able to find this stuff in inspection, but if you do run into this scenario, often just doing U moves is better, because usually looking to the back makes a bigger pause than you'd expect. So most people here would just pair it up like this, or maybe move it here and then rotate so you can pair it up and insert. But I don't know why you put it here and did this, which is just a very weird way of pairing it up. I can't see an advantage to that, so I would say not to do that because you have to rotate anyway. And then you rotated it to insert into the front, which is not good because then the look ahead is worse. If you insert this into the back instead, then besides just having potentially a better view of everything else, you get that deduction thing I talked about in the last solve, but where this side is enough to see everything because you don't need to look at that anymore. So after inserting this into the front, you had this case and you did 2 rotations for it, and that is like this. And then you actually insert it to the front again, which is not good. In fact, right after this, you rotated twice. So that goes to show you should insert into back slots as much as possible. But a better way to do this, depending on which finger tricks that you prefer, is one way is by doing F prime like this, and then inserting this. And if you prefer lefty F moves, which I feel like you actually would be good at based on the rest of the solve, then this can be done like that instead, and then insert. Okay, so after the way you did it, you rotated twice, and then you got this. And I want you guys to think about what kind of keyhole stuff you can do here that allows you to solve this very quickly. Anytime you're on last 2 slots especially, but this works for any slot, if you have a corner and edge solved, you can just take the unsolved ones and put them together and solve this and this, the remaining pieces, as one pair. This is called a pseudo F12 pair, which I talked about in my keyhole video, as well as some other video from a long time ago. It's not all that useful all the time, but learn this if you'd like to, because right here, this is a really nice case where this is just a 3-move pair. But anyway, you did this pair. And then for this pair, you did it weirdly. You did a rotation, which actually a lot of people do because this is the way you hold it for the beginner method. But then after this, you're going to need another rotation, so it's better not to do it this way. So here what you did was you moved this here, and I'm not sure why you did this. It could be for a few reasons. You did RU to R prime here, and I think that's either you saw this and noticed it would make a big block, which means you might skip OLL, or you're just trying to orient some edges. Either way, you shouldn't do that unless you know you'll skip OLL, because here you didn't end up skipping OLL. But just coming back to this case, if your edges are oriented already, it's best to do something like this. This is just going to be sexy sledge, but with only wide R moves. And then here you did this OLL with the lefty thumb move, which is interesting, which is why I mentioned that earlier. And here we have an F perm, but you did Y2 in PLL. Come on, you averaged like 9 seconds. You shouldn't be doing this. So this solve was pretty lucky in a few ways. You had 2 solved cross pieces and red and blue here. Now I don't know if you inspected to an X cross because it's hard to see where the X cross is coming from here. But the way you did it ended up making one, so good job. Red here, and then you took out blue with F2, and then this edge and this corner ended up pairing together when you insert blue in here like this. Next, somehow this edge and this edge were both already solved, which makes look ahead super easy. So you did this one, and then this one. Now during that, you should be looking ahead to this. You can see that it's white here and the edge is here, so you just have to track the edge. I think that you weren't really looking over here, which made you rotate in order to put it as a front slot. So make sure that you do pay attention to the back slots. So once you rotated, you had this case and you didn't want to rotate again, so you did sledgehammer and then insert this like that. And then OLL, the rest of the solve was pretty straightforward. And then PLL U perm. For this solve, red here is already done, and green is set up to go here. Orange is bad, and blue is over here. So what you did was insert green, and then do F2 to put these two in a much better spot. Now, that's what I would have done as well up to here, but what you did next was a little interesting. You did blue, and then I really think you overused this technique of moving edges in like that. So from here, it makes it flow better and save moves if you just put orange on top of blue and put them in together. So for your first pair, you did these two, and I did talk about this exact case earlier, but it's a little bit different when this edge is in the opposite slot. What you did was rotate to pair it, and then rotate again to insert. What's better when this is in the opposite slot is what I do personally is move the corner here and do sledgehammer here, and that gets the edge up here, and you can just insert. Another thing you could do if the finger tricks work for you is F like this, or with this thumb, or like this, and then insert this pair, and then F prime. I personally don't use that one though, as the finger tricks don't flow that well for me. So after the way you did it, next we have this and this. So you rotate and pair them up like that, insert into the back, and now we have this and this. So here, a little bit like the keyhole multi-slot, a very specific technique that can help a lot in cases like this, where I believe you did something like around 20, maybe almost 30 moves to solve this, which is the standard way, so nothing wrong with that, but there is a much faster way to do cases like this. How that's done is by solving this pair with keyhole, and that will change this to guaranteed to be a good case. So here, how you keyhole this is just ignore this pair and pretend that it's just an empty slot, and you will move this corner over here and insert that corner down here. And that can be done, for example, like this. Just change the orientation of the corner and then insert. Then when you move back, then you have this case, which is much better. And for cases where two edges are solved, you could do it in either order. So you could do this one first if you want. We can move this one away, solve that corner, which is like this. Just reorient it, and then move back and solve this case, which we usually do end up with a nice case. Okay, so afterwards you had OLL, and then PLL here, it's a J-perm from the back. I thought with the cube rotation, you were about to do the one regrip into no regrips for the end. But what you did instead was the reverse of that, I believe, which ended up with the top on the bottom, which is very weird, and don't use that algorithm. So you did a double regrip to start, and then, okay, I'm gonna have to focus. Yeah, and then you did AUF on the bottom. This is worse because the AUF is going to be more confusing, especially when it's rotated upside down, and there's a double regrip to start and a mid regrip instead of just one single regrip into this. So throughout the video, I mentioned some advanced things, but just the most important things for you are to make sure to use fewer cube rotations in F12, and that is by doing cases like this with your left hand if you're already facing this side, instead of rotating and doing it with your right hand. Also for this F12 case and its variations all around the cube, make sure that you know a way that has at most one cube rotation. Make sure you check out my PDF on F12 solutions if you ever run into a case where you don't know how to do it. And you can also reduce later rotations if you use your rotations to insert into back slots rather than rotating to insert into front slots, which make look ahead way harder. And the last way to reduce rotations, which is the advanced F12 look ahead thing I talked about, is when you find a corner, take a look at everything on the side. Usually, because of the U-turns you've been doing, you will know which the top pieces are. So for example, blue, orange, it could be either of these, but as you do U-turns through your previous F12 solutions, you probably would have realized that those don't go with this corner. So then in that case, after looking at everything, which includes all of these, you only need to look at that one piece at the other side. So by then you would already know it's this piece, but you just have to look to see its orientation so you know how to pair them up. And lastly, when you're making the cross, make sure not to overuse this technique of inserting an edge like this. It's great for cases like this where it's your last cross edge, but try not to use it all the time. So if you constantly end up with this case as your last cross edge, then you probably should be doing the cross a different way so that it goes in with something else. And I do have cross tips videos on the end screen here. If you're averaging 9, you probably won't learn too much from it, but there still are tips I think you definitely could use from here. Although you might do better with just a ton of examples, and I'll actually be making a video soon with a lot of cross examples and tips. Thanks for watching. Even though the average was 9, I hope this was helpful to everybody, and I'll see you guys next time.